Joe Biden and Boris Johnson prepare for their first face-to-face meeting as leaders on the eve of the G7 summit. On his first overseas trip since becoming US president, Joe Biden aims to refresh UK-US relations, though tensions about Northern Ireland loom large. We'll have the latest live from the G7 in Cornwall, also this lunchtime. The Health Secretary Matt Hancock rejects accusations by Dominic Cummings that he lied to the Prime Minister during the coronavirus pandemic, but admits that lessons need to be learned. Girls as young as 11 are being sexually harassed at school. The education watchdog warns that harassment is becoming normalised among young people. A woman who lost her job after saying people can't change their biological sex has won her employment appeal tribunal. And on what would have been the Duke of Edinburgh's 100th birthday, the Earl of Wessex talks to us about remembering his father.
I think that we go ahead and we celebrate what might have been and his life, and I think we try to turn it into something that's very positive.
And coming up in sport on the BBC News channel, up to 18,000 fans are allowed at Edgbaston as England take on New Zealand in the second and final test.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the BBC News at 1. The US President Joe Biden will hold talks with Boris Johnson in Cornwall in the next few hours, at the start of his first overseas tour since taking office. The two leaders are meeting on the eve of the G7 summit and will agree a new Atlantic Charter aimed at refreshing the relationship between the UK and US. But tensions about post-Brexit trade arrangements for Northern Ireland threaten to overshadow their discussions. Our diplomatic correspondent, James Landale, reports from Cornwall.
President Biden arriving in Cornwall late last night. His first steps on foreign soil since taking office. The start of a trip designed to show that after the years of Donald Trump, America is back and ready to work with allies.
This one's a scallop, that one's a scallop.
And the first of those allies is Britain. Boris Johnson, here visiting a school this morning, has never met Mr Biden, who once called him Britain Trump. But all that will be put aside as Prime Minister and President seek to reaffirm the relationship between their two countries.
Many happy scenes mark this all too brief visit, the second to be made to this country by an American president during
Presidential
his term
visits
of
have changed over the years, but they still have a canny way of revealing the state of US-UK relations. The fact Mr Biden's chosen to come here first shows he sees the relationship as important, but also perhaps in need of repair. And to do that, guarded by the Prince of Wales, one of Britain's new aircraft carriers, the Prime Minister and the President will sign a new Atlantic Charter, an update of the text agreed by Winston Churchill and Franklin Roosevelt in 1941 that shaped the post-war world, agreeing new ways of cooperating on global challenges, as well as discussing opening up travel with the US. But for all the warm words and pictures, there is one issue of immediate friction, namely the row between the UK and the EU over post-Brexit trade across the Irish Sea. President Biden's diplomats have made it very clear in public and in private that they would not welcome anything that would, in their words, imperil peace in Northern Ireland. The UK is resisting imposing checks on some goods heading for Northern Ireland. The EU says this breaches a protocol both sides agreed to try to avoid a hard border between the North and the Irish Republic. And the EU has put the row firmly on the G7 agenda.
This agreement has now to be put in place. It's about implementing what has been agreed. Once again, often the devil is in the detail. So therefore we showed and we will show flexibility on specific topics, but the overall frame is set and it has to be implemented now.
So the G7 leaders, portrayed here in a recycled pastiche of Mount Rushmore, will start arriving later for a summit already distracted by an existing row. The bigger challenges of the COVID pandemic and climate change await them in coming days. James Landell, BBC News, Cornwall.
Well, in a moment, we'll talk to our chief political correspondent, Adam Fleming. First, though, let's head to our North America editor, John Sopel, who is in Cornwall. So, John, what is the Biden administration hoping to get out of the next few days?
Well, I've just been on a briefing with senior White House officials, and they say it's absolutely fitting that Joe Biden's first overseas visit should be to the UK and first meeting with a foreign leader on foreign soil should be with the British Prime Minister, given the shared values and the common history that our two countries share. So that is all fine about the special relationship. I think they will be talking about things like technology, science, medicine, perhaps reopening flights to the US at some point in the future, all the things that are shared. The thing that struck me at the briefing was that the senior White House official didn't say a word about Northern Ireland, the Northern Ireland Protocol. I think the Americans, for public consumption, are wanting to focus on what unites Britain and the US rather than what divides them.
Interesting. And also they are keen to talk about developments in terms of the COVID vaccination programme.
Yeah, and in particular, let's call it what it is, vaccine diplomacy. There is a diplomatic battle going on between America now and Britain and China and Russia on the other hand. So you've got the US saying that they are going to buy 500 million Pfizer vaccines. They are going to distribute them to the poorest countries in the world. They described it as a monumental effort that they're making, and they're stressing no strings attached, no deals, you don't have to do anything to cozy up to us to get it, you will get them. And I think they're trying to make a strong counterpoint with Russia and China, who've maybe been a touch more muscular in what they demand from the countries who are receiving their vaccines.
All right, John, thank you. Let's talk as well to Adam Fleming, who's in St Ives. And interesting, John saying that Northern Ireland not being mentioned publicly, but we know it's going to come up in discussions, Adam.
Afternoon to you, Jane. Yeah, looming over the horizon there is one of the UK's new aircraft carriers, the Prince of Wales, which is going to provide a dramatic backdrop to that first face-to-face meeting between Boris Johnson and Joe Biden. Although I think Number 10 will be hoping that Brexit doesn't, in fact, loom over that conversation as well. I think Number 10 will be hoping that they can impress upon the President that the unionist community in Northern Ireland is worried about the disruption to trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland as a result of the protocol, and they have got just as much right under the Good Friday Agreement to be happy, which may mean that the pressure is then equally applied to the UK and the EU by the American president, and this disappears from the G7 as an agenda item. It's actually not even officially on the agenda. Number 10 would much rather that today we were focusing on that brand new updated Atlantic Charter, looking at cooperation between the US and the UK on security, on trade, on technology. And then tomorrow they'd much rather we were focusing on all the pledges that might be made about donating vaccines to poorer countries. On Saturday, strengthening supply chains so that there is never an every man for himself dash for PPE if there's a pandemic again. And on Sunday, how can these 7 democratic countries and their 4 invited guests stand up to less democratic countries like Russia and China? But the next 4 days will tell.
Adam, thank you. Adam Fleming and John Sopel. The Health Secretary Matt Hancock has rejected accusations made by Dominic Cummings that he lied to the Prime Minister during the coronavirus pandemic. Under questioning by MPs, Matt Hancock said at the start of the pandemic he instructed the NHS to plan on the basis that 820,000 people could die from COVID-19. But he said he was determined to stop that happening. Our political correspondent Jonathan Blake has been listening to the session.
He's been at the forefront of the government's response to the pandemic throughout. But 2 weeks ago, Matt Hancock was accused of incompetence and lies.
Is it your chance to give the version of events today, Mr Hancock?
The Health Secretary would today have his say on the decisions he and others took that shaped the UK's handling of coronavirus.
Order.
Claim by claim, accusations by the Prime Minister's former advisor Dominic Cummings were put to Mr Hancock. That he told the Prime Minister people in hospital would be tested for COVID-19 before returning to care homes.
We set out a policy that people would be tested when tests were available. And then I set about building the testing capacity to be able to deliver on that.
That he had blamed the Chancellor and others for blocking orders of personal protective equipment.
No, that is not a fair recollection of the situation.
And a direct question.
Did you ever say anything to the Prime Minister that you knew not to be true?
No.
Dominic Cummings has been asked to provide evidence for his explosive claims to MPs a fortnight ago, but so far hasn't done so. Matt Hancock said that was telling and accused the former advisor of undermining him.
I worked directly with the Prime Minister from the start of this. And of course I worked with his aides and his team as well. And I have no idea.
Did you know that he wanted the Prime Minister to fire you?
Yes, because he briefed the newspapers at the time.
Right.
Or somebody briefed the newspapers. I now have a better idea of who it was.
Beyond the clear clash of personalities that's given us two very different versions of events, there were bigger questions today about the government's handling of the coronavirus pandemic early on and how well equipped the UK was to deal with such a scenario. Accused by MPs of locking down too late, Mr Hancock said ministers were advised the public wouldn't comply for long, despite being aware of the potential loss of life.
I was given the planning assumption based on Spanish flu, and it was signed off at Cobra on the 31st of January. And that was a planning assumption for 820,000 deaths. And I was determined that that would not happen on my watch.
And the Health Secretary gave an insight into the stark choices he and others faced.
I remember the moment around the cabinet table when I said, we are going to have to tell everybody to stop all social contact. Right. And I remember thinking, this is the most extraordinary thing that I've ever said. And the Prime Minister said, yes, we are. You better go and tell them.
Jonathan Blake, BBC News, Westminster.
Girls as young as 11 have experienced sexual harassment in secondary schools in England. A review by Ofsted found that 9 out of 10 girls at schools and colleges said they'd experienced sexist name-calling or been sent explicit images. Many of the incidents go unreported, which the watchdog warns is leading to sexual harassment becoming normalised among young people. Zoe Conway reports.
It doesn't matter who you are, any age, you will experience as a woman sexual harassment.
It's normalised and it's okay for men to do these things to women and young girls, and there's not enough of a consequence.
Lucy and Keris have now left school, but they remember how hard it was being sent sexually explicit images by other pupils on social media.
I've received more than I can count on my hands images of privates that I did not want to see. And I think the first port of call is to go to your mum. But other than that, it's really hard to know what to do because you just feel very vulnerable in the situation and you feel like, I don't want to see that, I don't know what to do with it.
Sexual harassment has become normalised, so much so that it's not a surprise anymore and it's just brushed off. It's nothing that we think of as out of the ordinary. It's just become so normalised that most women have experienced it, whether in the street or on social media.
Ofsted visited 32 schools and colleges to investigate sexual abuse in schools. Inspectors were shocked by what they heard. Nearly 90% of girls told Ofsted that they or their peers had been sent unwanted explicit images. Nearly 50% of boys said they or their peers had been sent unwanted images. Children said sexual harassment, including online sexual abuse, had become normalised. And they said that most children felt that the sex education they received in school does not help them to navigate these issues.
Because it's something that's difficult for adolescents to talk to adults about, it's something the scale of which is still significantly underestimated by schools and colleges and adults more generally.
Ofsted wants to see schools making time to teach children how to cope with online abuse, and they want to see more training for teachers.
It's not okay to bully or peer into sharing a nude against their will, and it's certainly not okay to then go and post it on WhatsApp group to all of your friends. And yet for so many young people that has become commonplace, and we absolutely need to all work together to reset that cultural dial.
The government says it wants to bring together tech companies, the police, schools and charities so that online sexual abuse is anything but normal. Zoe Conway, BBC News.
A woman who lost her job after saying that people can't change their biological sex has won an employment appeal tribunal. Maya Forstater didn't have her contract renewed at a think tank after posting a series of tweets questioning government plans to let people declare their own gender. Today, a judge ruled that her original tribunal had erred in law. Let's find out more from our correspondent, Charlotte Wright. Explain more about this case and the background to all of this, Charlotte.
Well, it's hugely significant because this sets a precedent for future employment cases, and it means that other people who find themselves in a similar position may find that they have a case for unfair dismissal. Now, fundamentally, Maya Forstater believes that humans cannot change sex, and she sent some tweets saying this back in 2018. Now, her employer disagrees, saying that that view is an existential challenge to trans people, and they chose not to renew her contract. And it's this that she says was discriminatory, according to the Equality Act. Now, a tribunal in 2019 disagreed with that, saying that the view is incompatible with human dignity and therefore did not meet the Equality Act criteria. But today, after an appeal, that has been overruled. Gender-critical beliefs are protected under the Equality Act, according to this High Court judge. This is what she had to say in reaction.
When the government was consulting on self-ID, it was women who were most concerned, and then it was women's voices that were shut down. And I'm just an ordinary woman. I'm a mother. I was on Mumsnet. But I'm also a policy researcher, and I thought I should be able to tweet about this. And then when I couldn't, I became the test case.
So what happens now? Well, her former employer, Centre for Global Development, have said that they are disappointed and surprised by this, and that they're looking into various paths forward with their lawyers. It's worth remembering that this is all part of a preliminary hearing, and actually the actual tribunal still needs to take place. So that's the plan now, that they'll go back and hold the full tribunal.
All right, Charlotte, thank you. Charlotte Wright. The time is 17 minutes past 1. Our top story this lunchtime. Joe Biden and Boris Johnson are preparing for their first face-to-face meeting on the eve of the G7 summit. Coming up, large parts of the Northern Hemisphere are treated to a partial solar eclipse.
And coming up in sport on the BBC News channel, the former Australia boss Ange Postecoglou is named as Celtic's new manager on a 12-month rolling contract, replacing Neil Lennon, who resigned in February.
Today would have been the Duke of Edinburgh's 100th birthday. To mark the occasion, the Queen has been given a new rose named after the Duke. The rose, which is deep pink and double-flowered, was bred by the Royal Horticultural Society and planted in the gardens at Windsor Castle last week. Proceeds from its sale will go to the Duke of Edinburgh Awards scheme. The Queen has described the flower as lovely and said it was a very kind tribute. Well, in an exclusive interview with the BBC, the Earl of Wessex has paid tribute to his father, who died in April, describing him as an extraordinary character. Prince Edward also said he was saddened by the rift between the family and the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. The Prince has been speaking to our royal correspondent, Daniela Ralph.
Can I ask you about June the 10th? It would have been your father's 100th birthday. Something of a bittersweet day for you?
Yes, I think that's probably a fair thing to say, but I think that from a selfish point of view, we would have loved it if he had been here and been with us. But then birthdays were not necessarily his so he didn't really want all the fuss and bother, and so we celebrate what might have been and his life, and I think we tried to turn it into something that's very positive. I think it's very important to do that.
You must miss him.
Yes. Yes, but it's been a very difficult year, 18 months, because, luckily, so last summer we were able to spend a reasonable amount of time together, but yeah, it's been very difficult during this period. not being able to spend, but then like so many other families, we've all been separated and parted. So it's been very difficult for so many people, and we're no different in that sense.
It has now been 2 months since he died. I wonder how you now reflect on that period of time and how the public responded afterwards.
The funeral was an extraordinary day, but of course it was also very strange. What should have been an occasion for so many people, and so many people that he had touched in his life, not being there. It was a very strange, from coming from the outside with all the pageantry and then coming into St George's Chapel, especially into the nave, which was completely empty. It was a very moving and very sombre experience. But gosh, we were blessed with a beautiful day. And I'm just, so glad that we were able to do that bit at least, and to do it as this country does it really, really well.
And a lot of people were moved by seeing your mother as well in the chapel, sitting alone in her mask. It must have been very difficult for you to not be alongside her and able to comfort her that day.
Yes, exactly that. And the same for everybody, really. We were all sitting on our little family groups. But then that's no different to what so many other families have been experiencing up and down the country throughout this past year.
We can't escape the fact that it has been a difficult few months for the royal family on a number of levels, but particularly around the situation with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex and how that has played out so publicly. That has been difficult. I wonder how you view that now, or how you look at that particular situation.
I stay way out of it. It's much the safest place to be.
And do you feel any sadness about how it's played out?
Oh, of course, I mean, there are all sorts of issues and circumstances there, but we've all been through there. We've all had that same spotlight shone on our lives. We've been subjected to massive intrusion and all the rest of it, and we all deal with it in different ways.
A new baby for Harry and Meghan, the sweet baby Lilibet, a name that will be very meaningful for your family.
Well, we just wish them, all happiness. That's fantastic news, and yeah, absolutely. I hope they're very happy, and yeah.
How would you like your father to be remembered?
Everybody will have their own memories. He was that sort of larger-than-life person. Once met, never forgotten.
I'm sure. Your Royal Highness the Earl of Wessex, thank you very much.
Thank you.
There are stark regional variations in the number of people waiting more than a year for routine surgery across England. New analysis of NHS data shows that parts of Essex have the highest proportion of people waiting more than 12 months, with the longest delays being in orthopaedics. And the very latest figures show the number of people waiting for hospital treatment in England has risen above 5 million for the first time. NHS England says it has created a £1 billion fund to get services back to pre-COVID levels. Sophie Hutchinson has all the details.
This is how the NHS is trying to build up capacity. In a car park at a hospital in southwest London, they're putting up temporary operating theatres. The NHS is facing an unprecedented, huge backlog of patients needing treatment due to delays caused by the pandemic.
During the first and second wave, we were able to keep up with the most important and clinically urgent cancer and non-cancer surgery, but a significant backlog of less clinically urgent but important work built up. And so we've created this facility with 4 new operating theatres to help southwest London to catch up with that backlog.
The latest figures show that more than 5 million people were waiting for hospital treatment in England in April, around 1 million more than the same time 2 years ago.
I can't walk very far. I get what's called spasticity, and it's like when your limbs lock and my fingers lock and my hands lock.
Rachael Tomlinson has multiple sclerosis, a type that causes progressive disability. There's a relatively new drug which can slow down the disease. 16 months ago, she was told she needed a scan to see if she was eligible. But because of the pandemic, she's still waiting for an appointment.
There's no doubt my illness has progressed, and this drug can slow it down. And I kind of feel like I'm missing out on the opportunity for that to happen.
Across England, the highest proportion of people with the longest waits for treatment are in Essex, followed by Blackpool, parts of North East London and Norfolk. This doctor in Norfolk and Waveney says their workload has increased significantly because they're having to cope with the fallout of patients who can't get hospital treatment.
It's hugely frustrating, people coming in and sitting down and you know exactly what you need to do and you're having to say, listen, this is not going to be a quick fix and I have no other options but to just keep them going and that is probably the most difficult thing.
NHS England says average waits for non-urgent care have come down to 11 weeks and the number of people with the longest waits has fallen by more than 50,000 in April. But others are concerned the true scale of the backlog may be masked, with millions of people not even making it onto waiting lists because they've not yet been referred. Sophie Hutchinson, BBC News.
The consumer group Which says several COVID test providers on a government-approved list are offering misleading information about pricing and availability. The Department for Health says it's carefully monitoring providers. People travelling abroad currently have to book and pay for several tests. Let's find out more from our transport correspondent, Caroline Davies. So what exactly is happening here, Caroline?
So regardless of where you come into the UK, you have to have tests booked, whether that's green, amber or a red list country that you're coming into. And there is a list of these providers on the government website. They were originally listed in alphabetical order, but obviously that's a bit of an advantage if your company begins with 1, for example. So now they're listed according to price, with the cheapest at the top. Remember that the cost of testing is quite a political issue. The travel industry are concerned that tests are far too expensive and it's putting people off from booking to go on holiday. The government's previously said it will work with providers to try to reduce the price of tests. So that's the background. Consumer group Which looked at the prices being charged for amber list returnees. They need to have 2 tests. They said on the government website some providers were saying that they were as low as £60, but when people went through to book them, that was either for 1 test or the package being advertised wasn't available at all. They're saying that that is very misleading. The companies involved say that the issue was with how the Department for Health and Social Care was listing these prices. The department has said that it carefully monitors the issues raised by the public with private test providers and regularly evaluates their performance, adding if they don't meet minimum standards that they are removed from the official list, and Which have said that the prices have since been amended. You can expect to hear more about testing throughout the course of this summer, particularly if more countries are added to the green list.
All right, Caroline, thank you. Caroline Davies. England's cricketers are back in action today. It is the second test against New Zealand. The match began as examinations of past social media posts continued, the issue which has gripped English cricket recently. This test has plenty of significance, as Joe Wilson reports from Edgbaston.
Facing ugly truths. That's what the captain says England's cricketers are doing. Before play, T-shirts for inclusion, while an investigation into historical tweets continues.
Please have your mobile phones open, displaying your lateral flow test results.
Towards normality, 18,000 supporters allowed for this test event.
Well, for these spectators, their motivation and really the whole purpose of this occasion is entertainment.
James Anderson in his record-breaking test appearance would be needed later. England batted. Rory Burns with an early sign of timing. England were cautious in the first drawn test. Here was a chance to be bold, brave. In the stands, no distancing required. Jacket optional. Dom Sibley was steady, but gradually expanding. Patience is often the essence of test match batting and indeed bowling. New Zealand are resting a few players here. Tom Latham's the captain, leading by example. Ouch. England's total, meanwhile, has 50. By 12:45, spectators were singing, England were still scoring, and you know, it wasn't even raining. Not bad at all.
Let's be clear, the issues which have consumed English cricket in the build-up to this test match are still there. What I can say with certainty is that at lunch, England are 67 without loss, which sounds pretty good. Now, a lot of people will come to this test match to watch James Anderson bowl in his 162nd test match for England. But Jane, I think that might be the highlight of tomorrow's action.
Thanks very much, Joe Wilson. Thank you. Large parts of the northern hemisphere have seen a partial solar eclipse today. The moon travelled directly in front of the sun in what's called an annular eclipse, leaving just a thin sliver of sunlight visible. Our science correspondent Rebecca Morell reports.
An eclipse at sunrise in the United States. One of nature's most dazzling sights, the moon gliding in front of the sun, taking a bite from the shining disk. And this was the view from Canada, where the northernmost parts of the world were treated to a full spectacle. And it was a special kind of solar event known as an annular eclipse.
An annular eclipse happens when the moon is just a little bit further away from the Earth, so it looks smaller in the sky. And what you'll be able to see is a sort of ring around the moon. And so this is why that annular solar eclipses are sometimes known as the Ring of Fire. They're incredibly beautiful eclipses to spot as well.
The full eclipse began in Ontario, Canada, the moon casting its shadow across a narrow band of our planet's surface, and ended in Siberia. There was a partial eclipse in the UK, with up to 40% of the sun obscured, and in Edinburgh families had a chance to catch a glimpse as our star emerged from the haze. Across much of the country, though, the weather was overcast. This was the view from Cambridge, but every now and again the clouds parted.
Solar eclipses do happen roughly 1 or 2 times a year, but actually you've got to be in the right place at the right time to see them, and that's because the moon's shadow which it casts on the Earth is rather small. And so although they happen frequently enough, we don't actually get to see them from the same country very often.
London had a slightly better view this morning, but in the UK we'll have to get used to partial eclipses for a while. Our next total eclipse won't happen until 2090. But today's event has delighted many around the world with a display of a true celestial wonder. Rebecca Morell, BBC News.
Well, that takes us to a look at the weather. Let's get the latest from Louise Lear. Hi, Louise.
Hi there, Jane. We really could have done with clear blue sky and sunshine everywhere, couldn't we? But unfortunately, it's not as straightforward today. Quite a lot of cloud around. There's some rain in the Western Isles so far this morning, as you can see quite clearly. Some poor visibility, always the further west you are as well. The best of the sunshine has been out to the east so far today. The clouds been breaking up quite nicely, and this is where we'll have the heat as well across eastern and southeast England through the remainder of the afternoon. So this is what has been happening. You can see that weather front that's producing the rain across the far northwest, and with a southwesterly flow, quite a lot of cloud and a lot of claggy weather, really poor visibility, low clouds, some mist, and even the cloud thick enough for a few light drizzly showers across the southwest as well. So the east is best for the rest of the afternoon in terms of that cloud continuing to break through, and it will be quite pleasant. A breezier afternoon for many, but the wind's really starting to pick up across the far northwest with that front, gusts around 30 to 40 miles an hour. So here temperatures perhaps a little bit more subdued. We'll see low 20s through eastern Scotland and Northern Ireland, perhaps mid to mid 20s across eastern England. That's the mid 70s Fahrenheit. Day one of the second test at Edgbaston. Almost perfect weather conditions in some respects. Quite a muggy feel out there, but a good deal of dry weather with some sunshine coming through, and a pleasant 22 degrees to close out the afternoon. Through this evening, we continue to see that southwesterly flow driving in quite a lot of low cloud overnight. Our weather front continues to push its way steadily south, and as a result, with that cloud around, may well be quite an uncomfortable night for getting a good night's sleep as temperatures stay in the mid-teens. That weather front is still with us. Not that much in the way of significant rain, but certainly more cloud as it's going to push its way out of the north of England, down into North Wales and the North Midlands potentially. So a rather grey afternoon here, and what it's going to do is it's going to squeeze the warmth down into the extreme southeast. So 24 or 25 degrees here, behind it a little bit fresher, a little bit more comfortable perhaps you'll feel. 17 to 21 the high. But it's interesting, the warmth is set to return as we head into the weekend. The darker russets, the warmer air, well, that is going to push its way steadily north once again as we move into the weekend, and that high pressure builds, which ultimately means there's going to continue to be a good deal of dry weather, a good deal of warm weather, perhaps even getting a little bit too hot for many of us in the south.
All right, Louise, thank you very much, Louise Lear. And that is it from the News at One team for today. Time now to get the news wherever you are. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.